African Americans' attitudes towards STEM, implications for educational and occupational decision making. But before I start my remarks, I would like to say thank you for the invitation extended by Dr. Susan Olesen, Distinguished University Professor and Dean of Natural and Mathematical Sciences. And then I'd also like to say thank you to my good colleague, James L. Moore III, who has been serving in a stellar way as your Vice Provost for Diversity and Inclusion and Chief Diversity Officer. And before that, and concurrently, the Executive Director for the Bell Resource Center, as well as his distinguished professorship in urban education. It's good to see him and you all this evening, and I appreciate this invitation. When we gather in venues like this, whether it's virtual or previously in person, or in the near future, in person again, we're gathering with a call to action to broad participation in STEM. And we are compelled for this call to action because we see the data that shows that the number of African Americans earning degrees related to STEM occupations has not kept pace with Ohio's growing STEM economy, let alone in the nation. And you all have a projected to average a little under 2,000 new jobs each year between 2016 and 2026 that has STEM occupations at its core. And by 2026, you all will have filled or will be in the process of filling a little over 10,000 computer and mathematical positions, about 6,500 engineering occupations, and over 3,200 life science, physical science, and other science opportunities. And what this says to all of us as we gather is there's a lot of opportunity out there as relates to STEM, and there is a critical need for us to be responsive to this, and we are compelled to act. What's most important and critical here too is that this technical-based talent comes from within the state's borders. You know, any state institution mission has fundamentally at its core to create opportunities for the citizens in its state and to be responsive to the needs of the state, both from a commerce, education, political standpoint. And with that in mind, we recognize that there's a vibrant amount and consistency of culturally and ethnically diverse workforce ready, available to be tapped and prepared over time to be responsive to these challenges. Also, that we clearly want to draw upon the underrepresented African American population to strengthen the state and national scientific workforce as we do this work. There's other reasons that you gathered and made this commitment, put a program like this, and many of the programs that you all have in place and have been doing so for decades. You already know that more than 55% of African American students in the fourth grade and 71% in the eighth grade have yet to reach proficiency in critical math and science foundational courses in Ohio. And that's an opportunity for, as Dr. Moore laid out to be this pillar for STEM education and diversity, that's a call to action that you all are answering. And you also know that in 2016, only 6% of African-American high school students interested in STEM met the STEM benchmarks according to ACT. That's yet another place in which there's opportunity and work for us to be responsive to these opportunities. And for those of us who seek to shape the future of African-American representation in the scientific workforce, we all know there's a need to focus our attention toward the academic achievement in elementary and secondary education. We understand that there's a need to reach young people early and often and introduce them to career opportunities, particularly the ones that they may not have readily available in front of them. And the same is true for policymakers who must continue to work to increase the exposure of STEM fields and to promote STEM as a career option on this academic trajectory is important. I can't say enough, and I'm certain you've heard it often, that it is important and critical that early exposure is sort of fundamental to begin the discussion for young people as they form their career interests and they form their aspirations that matter to them. I'm going to take a quick pivot and perspective and just sort of pose. I can't see you, but I'll pretend that I can. And I'm going to ask a couple questions. And the first question is, how many of you have designed or worked on an intervention program designed to broaden participation in science? There's a good chance that a large number of you in attendance here have and continue to find value in contributing in this space, understanding the role it plays in early exposure. The second question is, how many of you have experience with end user or usability testing? And I'm imagining some hands are going up, but I'm also imagining there are questions as to why I might be posing that. Let me just hit a few basic steps that relates to product testing before you take your product to market. And it has relevancy to this discussion. And step one in this process is to determine the subject of testing. And in a case like this, we might hone in on intervention program. And in doing that, we would, from a step two, look at how we created our workflow that covers the main use case and anticipates user errors with appropriate feedback. So we're trying our best to understand what that end user experience would look like, desired outcomes, well before we put this product into market. And then second is we look for testers of this. And in our cases, we might be thinking about African-American males or some other group that you have a critical need to increase their participation in your collegiate population as well as the workforce. And then you go from there to set proper goals for the testing. What is it that we want to get from them? And it may be that we just want to change attitudes. It may be that we want to change behavior. And it may be that we want to increase participation in the workplace or in the collegiate population. And then from there, we want to start thinking about how to make sense of what we are testing. And in this process, we want to be very careful not to influence how decisions are made, and really want an authentic experience of interaction so we can see to what extent our target population interacts with, benefits from, and find use in this product that we are looking to bring forward. And then after we get done, we are going to look at where complications occurred, questions, and what was appreciated. And then we make improvements and we take it to market. And I set this question up this way so that I can ask you a couple other questions. And that is this: would you build a multi-million-dollar business without testing the product before you go to market? Would you simply use market performance metrics, or would you talk with potential customers? Now, I've been in a lot of conversations in intervention programs funded by NIH, NSF, institution-based, and those discussions really do begin with market performance measures. We're looking at existing research on a particular population, may not be the actual population that we're going to work with, but we use that information and we build out what is the equivalent of multi-million-dollar businesses. If you've received any of these grants, you know there's a whole spectrum of responsibilities that kick in managing these large projects that has very little with the outcome of the project. And your ability to understand how to manage these large scale, multi-million-dollar, multi-year interventions does play a kind of critical role in the end of how useful were they or are they to be for your population. Because I mentioned earlier how important these efforts are, that we have national and state-based challenges that requires us to think in a very, very strategic, meaningful way about these projects. So unlike businesses that hope to convert customers, these intervention programs I'm referencing have a committed participant group, a group that becomes dependent on the promises made by these programs. Promises made by these programs. And we do make promises in these programs. We become partners with the parents. We become partners with the family. We become partners with the community to be responsive to creating these opportunities for young people. And as we function and operate in this space, we have a serious duty to have thought very carefully about what we are introducing these young people to, and to what extent these programs and interventions are designed on the front end to be highly effective. I want to share with you what we learned when we were asked to explore attitudes of African Americans toward STEM education and professions in the state of Arizona. And the State Community Foundation funded the project. It was the State of Black Arizona. And this is a case where the question was asked on the front end: what are the attitudes and desires of the population for which we are designing this program? And it was a very interesting process. But let me set up the problem that we were setting out to tackle. And I think this problem is uniform with this gathering. That there's a lack of a viable STEM workforce And this increasingly threatens the position of the United States as a leader in science and technology. Now, there are many that are not moved by opening up opportunities for others. They're not moved by breaking down barriers. They're not moved by creating new pathways, but they are moved when there is a explicit concern of the United States being unable to play a critical role in science leaders going forward, that the inability to populate a strong scientific workforce makes us very vulnerable when it comes to our global standing. That does capture the attention of many. In particular, the nation's declining scientific workforce, specifically as it relates to African Americans, continue to jeopardize the country's ability to solve complex technical challenges. That we are at a stage in our country that there is no pathway or future that results in excellence that does not include diversity. Like we don't produce enough white males in colleges, coming out of high school, to populate these professions as historically been the case. We haven't made it attractive for foreign-born talent to stay in the same way as in the past. And it is apparent that no organization can envision a future if they remain with little levels of diversity. It's going to be virtually impossible to maintain one's stature when you have to continuously supply your workplace. These challenges affect our ability to protect our country's citizens as well, address the social well-being that we have at play that these STEM professions bring to the forefront. We are living in a time where science is one of the most important discussions we talk about when we talk about dealing with COVID, getting out of COVID, and having conversations about the vaccine and things that we have now. That science, you're hard pressed to not have a science-based discussion every day because of the times that we live in. And the most troubling concern connected with an increased focus on STEM initiatives is the minimal participation that we've had in our country for citizens of color, particularly African Americans, in undergraduate and graduate programs that contribute to the science workforce. We know that there are barriers to career opportunities when one doesn't have these advanced degrees to move to and through the workplace. And we recognize that not only do we want to have increased participation in the workforce, we also need to embolden and build a robust pipeline in STEM education as to create some vibrant opportunities. The questions that we pose in Arizona, one is, do attitudes towards STEM fields among African Americans in the state of Arizona influence their decision to pursue college degrees and careers in these fields after controlling for other personal characteristics? Then the second was, what are the significant factors that lead to the pursuit of STEM majors and careers in the state of Arizona for African Americans? And we built a statewide database where we surveyed on STEM attitudes across the state. And what we did was we wanted to understand the discourse that was happening in the communities. So we surveyed, we had really good assistance to gain information to survey Black churches, community centers, events. We had some, really important connections to the major urban areas in Phoenix, Flagstaff, and Tucson to get robust African American community-based data. And we ended with 334 usable surveys. 62% were females, 38% were males, and the average age was 48 from this community based. And we analyzed our data using logistic regression because we had binary variables that we were interested in. And let me share with you, what we learned. The first is that being a female showed a positive relationship with pursuing a STEM career. And this supports the growing and mounting data that shows that women since 2000 are earning about half of the science and engineering degrees, and therefore, creates a opportune population for us to think carefully about from a recruiting standpoint into our programs. And then age showed a positive relationship with pursuing a STEM career. And we had to do some follow-up on this particular one, but in follow-up discussion, we learned that it's likely linked to the participant's skill, abilities, and temperament that were likely to increase that cognitive demands match with the skills, abilities, and interest and goals as one got older in this particular pathway toward a STEM career. And then third, we found that African Americans who seriously consider selecting a major in STEM were more likely to pursue STEM major and career. So it indicated that individuals, going back to these programs I mentioned earlier, must be exposed to these opportunities early on and provided a pathway into STEM-based majors in college and into careers as options through guided support and effort. And we have prior research that shows that the role of social networks, family and friends play a kind of critical role in shaping career desires and aspirations, that it's important that not only the support for the student to be nurtured in these programs, but also to gain the support of the family and support structure. Because what we learned is when the decisions are being made about going to college and career, it's not done in isolation. It's done in consultation with parental figures, mentors, and individuals from the community that have been a steadfast pillar for them. And that is also critical for us to think about addressing in our outreach efforts and programs. The next one finding was African Americans who believed that they had the ability to obtain a degree in STEM fields were more likely to pursue STEM majors and careers. And this is where self-efficacy as a predictor of workforce related desires and interests plays out. Many of these programs that we put into place, we are nurturing self-efficacy. We are allowing these young people to see themselves and others like them find success, and then putting them in position to envision that same success for them. And then confidence in one's ability to succeed in math and science increases the likelihood of these aspirations, right? So this is where we are attempting to tackle that fourth grade and eighth grade proficiency in such a way that is not only that those grades will increase, but their self-efficacy and belief in themselves and to what they believe they can do, it becomes a tremendous asset in their life and career. And then the next finding is African Americans whose family supported their efforts to pursue a STEM degree were more likely to pursue STEM majors and careers. I got a little ahead of myself a couple of findings ago, but this stood out. That family support remains a critical aspect on the college and degree selection process. And many of us know this from a practical standpoint, because if we went back and we remember how we made our choices, it was definitely not in isolation. And if you were first generation, like many of us, it was definitely a group-based decision, because it took everyone in the room to help you think pretty carefully about what is this I'm getting myself into at 18 that is likely going to shape what I do for the rest of my life. And moving into academic fields viewed as new is difficult without a support system. And because STEM and some medical spaces are fairly new to some African-American families, the amount of support to go into this new terrain is critical. And that, raised up in a sort of important way. And then lastly, this one is of particular interest, I would say, to this group. There were misconceptions about STEM education and professions out in that community. That there was a belief that STEM jobs were decreasing in the state, when in fact the data was showing the complete opposite, that they were growing at record numbers, and were projected to continue to grow in much larger numbers over time. And then it was also thought the positions were low paying opportunities. And most know that have done some work in this space, you would recognize that they're not low paying in comparison to the larger marketplace. But that was another misconception that needed some disruption in this project. And then lastly, they didn't see any real futures with STEM professions. And that was kind of largely due just to a lack of awareness and no real opportunity to engage what does the pathway in STEM education and STEM careers, what does that open up? And so, the state of Arizona found this data to be very interesting, in which they use to think about their outreach, communication, marketing, and collaborative efforts in the African American community. What we ultimately learned is that what we found corroborated prior studies' assertion that self-efficacy presented evidence that attributed self-efficacy and persistence in STEM to the input of teachers, parents, mentors, Dr. Moore's gonna like this, counselors and peers, that network is huge in the building one's self-efficacy. The study also provides evidence that this notion, by demonstrating that a participant's contemplation of selecting a STEM major, feeling that she or he has the ability to complete STEM coursework and believe that his or her family supports such a degree, all increases individuals' likelihood of pursuing a STEM degree or career. And then as self-efficacy in STEM has the propensity to increase positive attitudes as it relates to STEM education occupation. We provided some recommendations for them, and I think some of these may be relevant as you all look to become a national leader in STEM education and ultimately professions. We suggested that they conducted focus groups with African Americans in STEM fields in the state already to inform the body of knowledge that they were using to think about policies that they were putting in place in the state. We also suggested that they design and disseminated a subsequent survey to college recruiters in Arizona to understand the most effective recruitment strategies that are used to entice African Americans to pursue STEM fields. Just gaining some knowledge from those that do this on a fairly regular basis. And then we also suggested that they examine articulation agreements between their community college system and university to recruit African Americans in STEM and think about a very creative pathway because of the large population of African Americans that were in their community college infrastructure. And then next was to design some empirical studies to examine how Arizona compares to peer states on the presence of African Americans in STEM. And that looking at those findings, a specific set of recommendations could be provided for a variety of constituents. And that is that that's a state that has a relatively small Black population. And that understanding how other states with relatively small Black populations, African American populations, were navigating their education and career pathways. And then the last one there that we shared was to survey STEM employers in their state to inform various constituents on the specific recruitment and retention strategies that have been successful for them in their corporate workspace. And with that, I will bring closure to my remarks by saying thank you for allowing me to share some perspectives in your discussion and plans to become a critical asset in your state as relates to STEM education and profession. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Jackson, for your insightful lecture. Now I'm turning things to Dr. Dorinda Gallant, Associate Professor in the Department of Educational Studies in the College of Education and Human Ecology, as well as the Director of the Lewis Stokes for Alliance for Minority Participation. Dr. Gallant, the floor is now yours.
Good evening and thank you. What a wonderful lecture. For those who have not done so yet and you have a question, please post the question in the Q&A section. We have two questions to start with. So Dr. Jackson, the first question is, it says, it is often said, you can't be what you can't see. What roles do instructors play in shaping student attitudes towards their own self-efficacy in STEM?
A wonderful question. And, we understand the important role that teacher expectations play And students, whether they voice their ability to pick up on having expectations placed on them or not, it feeds into how they interact in that classroom and think carefully about opportunities that come from them. Here's where the challenge comes in when we deal with the sort of teacher expectation, right? That it's not until a student shows or express interest that goes beyond, above and beyond what the teachers believe or expect they can do, that you run into a problem, right? And that's where, I would say this question really hones in on is, for students that do have this acumen in STEM, where do they cultivate those opportunities and to find those vibrancies? And I think it's, we live in a time where we have a lot of creative ways to be supportive in a virtual, digital sort of platform to support in this space. But we can't address this without addressing teacher education program. And I think you all might have one there. And then the way in which we prepare professors to interact with students in the classroom. And that's where we can hone in on trying to be supportive and address this intergenerational issue around teacher expectation.
Thank you. Another question that's similar. It says, once underserved students enter an undergraduate STEM program, any advice on how instructors can retain these talented students into successful STEM careers? How do we fight against the leaky pipeline in STEM training?
So there are two strategies that emerge from data out there in this regard. One certainly is to get these young people engaged in undergraduate research or ask for them, bring them into your research laboratory, right? Because reading about how science works and living it is a completely other matter. And then that creates a pathway to the second dynamic, and that is, try to be creative and create cohort-based groups so you can get some cohort effect. So if you have a lab or if you have an undergrad research opportunity and you can engage them in that space, they will build some level of camaraderie and group dynamics in those spaces that can kick in on certain challenges where you as a professor or instructor may not be best suited to do, but that peer mentoring is critical. Getting them engaged and thinking about the where cohort effects can kick in. And so two strategies, and that there are others, but the two that came to mind were certain undergrad research, and if you have a lab, bring them into your lab. And then group dynamics, cultivate help identify a point them in direction of how they can do this journey not alone but a part of a group.
Thank you. So another question that came up that's presented is that you mentioned earlier that maybe 2,000 new jobs are out there for students in STEM. However, at times, students of color and African Americans in particular associate academic success with acting white. How might we adjust these attitudes and bridge this gap, ultimately helping fill these new jobs with bright, high-achieving African American students?
This is a tough one, right? This is a tough one because we do understand the value that students put on their peers' thoughts about them. And that's a hard one to address, but it's certainly one that we should not shy away from and think pretty carefully about how to support those students that don't feel that they should have to make choices, that I'm either going to be smart or I'm either going to be well liked by my peers. And, that's a problematic, disposition that, I think we as educators, we as community members have to think pretty carefully about, that we need to be acknowledging and rewarding academic success in the same way that we might recognize other forms of success that may not be connected to academics. And so I don't have the best answer for that one, because it's that was an issue I had to deal with, as a student. And I'll tell you, for me, it was all sort of a, internal sort of stuff. I said, it just didn't seem that I had to choose. And, I was able to kind of overcome that and have a pretty broad spectrum of people that I interacted with. But I do recognize that that is a major issue and challenge that we got to do more work on, quite frankly.
Okay, thank you. So next question, you mentioned misconceptions about STEM jobs. Do you think this applies outside the sample?
Absolutely. We weren't able to capture everyone, but I think what we did was we captured what is said in those communities, right? So we didn't get to talk to everyone, but perspective like that was misinformation that was heard and shared and reshared. And quite frankly, it was the most eye-opening component to this, because going back to this, product testing, that we develop programs based on the assumption that they understand the value of STEM, that they understand that there's career opportunities out there, and that they understand that this is a pathway to well-paying jobs. And what we learned in that was that's not the case, that we had individuals in the community that were shaping the way young people was thinking about going to college and what they were doing. And they did not have the best information about these STEM careers. And that, I'm certain, was playing a role in some of the choices that these young people were making, because these are their resource bases that they go to. So absolutely, I think it goes beyond. And then I think also, just leaving the state of Arizona alone, start asking individuals in the community that, what they know about STEM. Do they even know what STEM is? And, it just, there are opportunities for us to sort of better educate our communities that are highly influential in how young people make decisions about careers and education.
Okay, the questions are coming in. Wonderful. So the next question is, it says many traditional strategies are focused on having students, faculty, or researchers change or adapt to existing inequitable. Many traditional strategies are focused on having students, faculty, or researchers change or adapt to existing inequitable, non-inclusive institutions and systems. what are some effective strategies or practices focus on changing or disrupting these systems to level the playing field?
I definitely appreciate this question. And I got a whole nother hour-long talk about social closure theory and how it plays out almost tantamount to this question where opportunities are closed off. And that what social closure theory does is it introduces this notion of organizational ownership. So to the getting to the question to what the person was asking, that social closure theory, suggests that organization should own the disparities that they create, that create this continuous outcomes where lower level, less prestigious opportunities are for people of color. And that it's problematic to believe that those that are being disadvantaged can muster up enough self-agency to change the organization, right? So we understand through self-agency, that's how a Dr. Gallant and others have been able to disrupt, navigate through organizations that weren't designed for their success. So they were able to find their own support network system. They were able to create their own sort of advisory panel and group. And it's not, and her success is not because I know you all want to take this, and I won't say your institution name. I don't want to make it like an institution, but it just becomes a scenario where you got successful professionals, and it's not because the institution that they're successful. It's in spite of the institution that they're successful, and that's where we end up with these sort of individual level successes and opportunities that's based on a person's ability to navigate and change. The solution that is hard pressed to find, that the question asker is getting at, is there's a letter missing in leadership, and that's C, and that's courage. That you have to have a leader with courage that is willing to elevate the priority of a group or groups that are less likely to be a major part of the donor base, that are less likely to influence the policies at the state legislature level, or less likely to disrupt their ability to do their work, but are more likely to have a 7-day news cycle. That when we have challenges that we bring to leadership, it's 7 days of potentially bad press at most. And most leaders feel that they can manage 7 days of bad press, but they can't manage the alienation of their major donor. They can't manage the strife with policymakers and legislators, right? And so to the question, that C is missing. That's courage, right? That if they're comfortable with a model that says there's always someone on the bottom, and that if your group is on the bottom because your group only creates a 7-day news cycle, that's why those are some of the realities of disrupting the way our organizations function. But I got a whole another hour or so on that one,
Thank you. So this next question is about pipeline. The question is, what efforts have been made with clubs at the elementary and middle school level? For example, robotics clubs and science Olympiad.
Robotics has been huge. Spellman and Spellbox has been sort of transformative as it relates to the Black women in science. Yeah, these clubs, I do say, are important and huge, and they're meaningful because what they do is they pair the group camaraderie of sports with academics, right? That, one of the things you get from, being on sports teams is a level of camaraderie, team support, a sense of accomplishment and success. And what those efforts do is they pair academic performance and kind of these group dynamics, that kind of the best of both worlds, and allow, I think I would say, allow these young people to be able to harness that competitive nature and spirit that they have, but to do it focused on on academics. And so I've seen where these programs have been tremendous, and even at the collegiate level, that I did a project that studied robotic teams, and they were basically like intramural sports, and they competed. And each university was like 8 HBCUs. Each one had a team. They competed. They had competitions. They were called friendlies, but they were competing. And it built a great deal of camaraderie, interest in computing, and it helped them to disrupt the fact that for those that came to their institution interested in computing, that they were able to get them interacting with computer-based content early, right, before they got admitted to the program. So they were doing this for their first 2 years. And that was their way to get them exposed to computing. And it was very well received.
Thank you. We are almost out of time. So I am going to turn this over to Dr. Moore to close out. There was a lot of wonderful questions, and hopefully we can send those questions to you, Dr. Jackson, and maybe there could be a response. So I'm going to now turn it back over to Dr. Moore to close us out.
Well, thank you, Dr. Jackson. It's always a pleasure to be in your presence. You certainly shared a lot of insights that many of our guests that are signed in, that I'm sure will be able to take in the work that they do. And so it's always good to connect with another fellow Big Ten institution. Maybe one day I will be able to convince you to come to Ohio State, but hint, hint. So I am thankful for Dr. Gallant for taking time to be the moderator of our Q&A session. And I want to thank everyone for spending time with us tonight on a very important topic. Please be sure you go to the website, go osu.edu/inclusivestem to sign up for other upcoming events, including our next talk that is scheduled on Wednesday, April 7th at 6 p.m. And our guest lecturer will be Dr. Jordan Gurton. I thank everyone for spending time again with us tonight, and enjoy the rest of your night. Take care.